They claimed the ancient throne would never awaken, then a human touched it. The alarm was already screaming when I stepped off the shuttle. Not a fire alarm. Not a collision warning. Something worse, the kind of alarm that means a human being has done something the entire galaxy agreed no living creature should ever do. I knew it was about me before Ambassador Dreth even opened his mouth. His forearms were shaking, which, for a Veth, is the equivalent of a full breakdown. "You crossed the barrier," he said. "I walked past a rope," I said. "My name is Marcus Vell. I am 34 years old, born in Lagos, trained at the University of Edinburgh, employed by the Galactic Xenoarchaeology Commission as a field researcher. I have spent 11 years digging up things that other species left behind, cataloging them, writing papers about them, and occasionally touching them when I probably should not have. That last habit has caused more trouble than anything else in my career. But it has also taught me more than any amount of standing at a distance ever could. I had arrived on Ethon Prime 6 days earlier, part of a joint research team assembled by the Commission after long-range scans flagged a structure of unknown origin beneath the planet's northern plateau. The planet itself was dead, no atmosphere worth mentioning, no water, no life. Just rust-colored rock and silence, and beneath it, something that had been sitting quietly for longer than human civilization had existed. The structure was called the Throne Chamber by the time I arrived. Someone else had named it. It had already been named before the Commission sent anyone, because it turned out that 4 other species had found it decades ago and decided, unanimously, to leave it exactly where it was and not discuss it openly. I found this out on day 2, when I asked why there were diplomatic envoys from 7 different civilizations present at what was supposedly a routine archaeological dig. Ambassador Dreth had given me a look that I was beginning to recognize as the alien equivalent of deep exhaustion. The Conclave, as they called themselves, had discovered this site at various points over the past 4 centuries. The Veth had found it first, 260 years ago. The Suri came next. Then the Kalari, the Dran, the twin species of the Omu Compact, and finally the Rethis. Each of them had sent their best minds, their bravest individuals, their most accomplished scholars. Each of them had encountered the throne and received the same message, broadcast directly into the mind of anyone who came within 20 meters of it, a single phrase, wordless but absolutely clear: only the inheritor may sit. No one knew what an inheritor was. No one had been brave enough, or reckless enough, to find out. The throne itself was, and I am choosing these words carefully, because I have written 3 academic papers about it since and I still struggle to describe it accurately, enormous. 12 meters tall, composed of a material that did not match any known mineral composition, black in a way that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its surface was covered in symbols arranged in patterns that shifted slightly depending on the angle from which you viewed them. They were not decorative. I knew that the moment I saw them. They were functional. They were doing something. I just did not know what. The remains of Scholar Elder Van of the Veth were still in the chamber. Calcified, frozen in the posture of someone who had raised a hand in greeting and never been able to lower it again. That had happened 197 years ago. Ven had walked 3 steps closer than anyone before or since, and that had been enough. The Commission had left the remains in place out of respect. The Veth delegation stood as far from them as the chamber allowed. I want to be clear about something. When I walked past the barrier on the morning of day 6, I was not being brave. I was not making a statement. I was not attempting to prove anything about humanity or our place in the galaxy or our fitness for whatever the throne represented. I was looking at a glyph on the lower left quadrant of the throne's base that looked, unmistakably, like a star map. I had seen similar configurations in ruins on 3 other worlds. I wanted a closer look. That is genuinely the entire reason. The rope barrier was a physical marker the Commission had placed. It was not electrified. It was not alarmed. It was a rope, with a small sign attached, in 7 languages, that said "Do not cross." I had not noticed the sign. I had been looking at the glyph. I crossed the barrier, walked 11 steps, and put my hand on the surface of the throne. I did this because the glyph was at eye level, and I could not see the fine detail from 2 meters away, and I wanted to trace the lines with my finger to determine if they were carved or grown or printed by some process I had not encountered before. I reached out. My fingertips touched the surface. It was warm, noticeably, surprisingly warm, like a stone that had been sitting in afternoon sunlight, except there was no sunlight in this chamber and the ambient temperature was 4 degrees above freezing. The glyph lit up. Then the one above it. Then the one beside it. Then, in a cascade that moved faster than I could track, every symbol on the entire surface of the throne ignited at once, and the light was not light in the ordinary sense. It went through my eyes and kept going, straight into the part of my mind where language lives, and it started talking. Behind me, I heard 17 different sounds that roughly translated, across 7 species, to the same thing: absolute horror. I could not turn around. Not because I was paralyzed. Because what was happening inside my head was so dense, so layered, so overwhelmingly large, that turning around felt like trying to read a book while someone poured a library into your skull. I stood there, hand flat against the warm surface, and I let it happen, because there was nothing else I could do, and also because, if I am being honest, it was the most extraordinary thing I had ever experienced in my life. The throne was not attacking me. It was remembering. And somehow, without any frame of reference or preparation or warning, I was the one it had chosen to remember with. Around me, every alien delegate in the chamber had dropped to the floor. Not unconscious, I could hear them breathing, hear the small sounds of shock and confusion, but overwhelmed by the edge of what I was receiving at full intensity. Like standing beside a speaker playing at a volume designed for a different kind of ear entirely. I did not fall. I do not know why. I stayed on my feet, hand on the throne, and I listened to 80,000 years of memory pour into me like rain into a dry riverbed. The species was called the Ethoni. They were the first. Not the first in this region of space, not the first among the known civilizations, the first anywhere, in this galaxy, to look up at the stars and decide to go. They had been gone for so long that every species currently drawing breath in the galaxy had evolved from single-celled organisms after the Ethoni had already risen, built, traveled, and vanished. But they had not vanished entirely. They had left something behind. Many things, in fact, installations and engines and archives scattered across hundreds of worlds. But the most important thing they had left behind was a plan. A long, patient, extraordinary plan for what should happen when the galaxy was ready for a steward. Not a ruler. Not a conqueror. A caretaker. Someone to hold the keys to what the Ethoni had built and use them wisely. The throne was the lock. The inheritor was the key. I was still processing this when the cascade of memory slowed, and the voice, not a voice, but the intent of a voice, the shape of communication without sound, asked me a question. It did not ask in words. It asked the way a door asks, when it is unlocked, by swinging open. I pulled my hand back. The light on the throne dimmed but did not go out. The symbols kept glowing, softly, like embers. The chamber was absolutely silent except for the sound of 17 species breathing and, somewhere behind me, what I was fairly certain was Ambassador Dreth saying something in Veth that the translator rendered as, "This is not possible, this is not possible, this is not possible." I turned around. Every delegate in the chamber was staring at me. Some were on the floor. Some had made it back to their feet. All of them were looking at me the way you look at something that has just rewritten your understanding of the world so completely that you do not yet have the words for what you are feeling. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my notebook. I had a great deal to write down, and I did not want to forget any of it. The silence lasted about 4 more seconds. Then everyone started talking at once, and the translator drone above my head went into what I can only describe as a breakdown, trying to render 7 simultaneous streams of panic into something coherent. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Then I wrote, the Ethoni were real. Then I looked up, because Ambassador Dreth was standing directly in front of me now, all 4 arms at his sides, which is a Veth posture I had not seen before. Later I learned it means, I am so far beyond my training that I have stopped responding and am simply existing. You touched it, he said. I did, I said. And it responded. Extensively, I said. He looked at the notebook. He looked at me. He looked at the throne, which was still glowing softly in patterns that had not been visible before I touched it. Then he said, very quietly, in perfect standard so that no translation was needed, "What are you?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, apparently, the inheritor. Then I went back to writing, because the memory was already beginning to fade at the edges, the way dreams do after waking, and I was not going to let a single word of it slip away. 6 hours after I touched the throne, I was sitting in the Commission's mobile research station, surrounded by empty coffee cups and 47 pages of handwritten notes, when the door opened and Ambassador Dreth walked in with 6 other delegates behind him. I had been expecting this. I had, in fact, been expecting it since about the 3rd page. The delegates represented every species in the conclave. I had met most of them in the first 2 days of the expedition, brief, formal introductions, the kind where everyone is polite and nobody says what they are actually thinking. The Suri delegate was called Orin, a tall being covered in fine silver filaments that moved independently, like grass in a light wind. The Kalari were represented by a pair who moved in perfect synchrony and apparently shared their cognitive functions between 2 bodies. They had introduced themselves as a single entity named Kalis. The Dran delegate was Wrath 7, which I had learned was not a name but a designation, the 7th diplomatic representative of the Wrath lineage. The Omu Compact had sent 2 delegates, Pello and Sevas, who were technically from the same species but had diverged enough evolutionarily to look completely different. And the Rethis had sent a young delegate named Iria, who I had noticed on day 1 because she was the only one who seemed genuinely curious about the site rather than simply anxious about it. Dreth sat down across from me. The others arranged themselves around the room in a way that was probably meant to feel casual but felt, instead, like a hearing. "We need to understand what happened," Dreth said. "So do I said honestly. "I'm working on it." "You were inside the resonance field for approximately 11 minutes, said Kalis, both bodies speaking in perfect unison. "No known being has survived more than 30 seconds of direct contact with the throne's surface. The Veth Elder Ven perished after a proximity exposure. You stood with your hand pressed flat against it for 11 minutes and walked away to take notes." I had a lot to write down. "That is not the point," Kalis said. "I know," I said. "I'm deflecting because I'm still processing what I experienced, and direct conversation is harder than writing right now. Give me a moment." There was silence. I appreciated that. I closed the notebook, set it on the table, and looked at each of them in turn. "The Ethoni were the first spacefaring species in this galaxy," I said. "You all know this, or suspected it, which is why this site has been treated with such extraordinary care for 4 centuries. What you did not know, or what some of you chose not to share, is what the throne is actually for." Dretha's expression shifted. Iria leaned forward slightly. Wrath 7 went very still. "It's a succession mechanism," I said. "The Ethoni did not die out randomly. They prepared to leave. They seeded the galaxy with their knowledge, their technology, their infrastructure, all of it dormant, all of it waiting. And they built the throne to activate it, when the right species was ready." "Ready by whose definition?" Orin asked. His filaments had drawn close to his body, which I had learned meant tension. "Theirs," I said. "But it's not about virtue or power or age. The Ethoni made mistakes. They expanded too fast, built an empire that became rigid, lost the ability to adapt. They did not want to leave their legacy to another empire. They left it for a species that still carried the memory of uncertainty. A species that had not yet grown comfortable with comfort." I paused. "They also left a biological marker. The Ethoni did not just seed knowledge across the galaxy. They seeded genetics. Small contributions to developing species on dozens of worlds, made over thousands of years. An engineered trait they called, and the translation is approximate, the empathy strand." The room was very quiet. "Humans carry it," I said. In full expression. The throne read my biology the moment I made contact. That is why it responded to me and not to any of you. You may carry fragments, the resonance you all felt in the chamber suggests you have trace amounts, but in humans, the full sequence is present and active." I looked at my notebook. "We have been wondering for 200 years why human emotional range is so much broader than expected for a species of our age. We assumed it was evolutionary noise. It wasn't. We were designed to feel exactly the way we do." No one spoke for a long time. Then Pello said, very quietly, "What does it activate?" "The throne. If someone sits in it." "Everything," I said. "The Ethoni network. All of it, simultaneously. Stargates, archives, terraforming systems, communication relays, and, yes, their defensive infrastructure." 80,000 years of accumulated technology, keyed to human biology, waiting to come online. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. This one had weight. I could feel everyone in the room recalibrating, running the implications forward, arriving at the same destination from different directions. Humanity was a species 2 centuries into space travel. We were small, new, considered and proven by every other civilization in the conclave. We had been tolerated at this site as junior members of a research team. And we had just been handed the keys to an empire that made every current galactic civilization look like a village. You have not sat in it, Iria said. It was not a question. She was reading the situation accurately. No, I said. Why not? I thought about how to answer that. The honest answer was, because I am not ready and neither is anyone else, and doing something enormous before you understand it fully is how you end up with catastrophes instead of solutions. But that sounded arrogant, like I was implying I had the wisdom to wait while everyone else would have rushed forward. So I said the simpler version. Because I wanted to understand it first. Dreth looked at me for a long moment. And now? Do you understand it? Not yet, I said. But I understand enough to know that when I do sit in it, if I do, it has to be a choice, not an accident. And there are things I need to know before I make that choice. I looked at Wrath 7. Starting with what your lineage has been keeping from the rest of the conclave for the past 800 years. The silence that followed was the loudest one yet. Wrath 7 did not deny it. He looked at me with the expression of someone who has been carrying a weight for so long that being discovered is almost a relief. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and quiet. We found records, he said. In the 2nd century of our space travel. The Ethoni left archives on the Dran homeworld, sealed and encrypted. Our scholars broke the encryption in secret and read what was inside. He paused. The records described the succession plan in full. The throne. The inheritor. The network. Everything you have described. Another pause. They also described what happens to the existing galactic power structure when the inheritor takes the throne. Every political boundary, every resource claim, every diplomatic treaty currently in existence becomes secondary to the authority of the Ethoni network's designated steward. So your lineage decided to keep it quiet, I said. We decided to ensure that no species ever became the inheritor, Wrath 7 said. We were not wrong to be afraid of what that kind of power would do to any civilization that held it. We failed to consider that the Ethoni may have known what they were doing when they chose the criteria. There it was. The shape of 4 centuries of conspiracy, laid out in one quiet admission. 7 species standing in this room, 6 of whom had known or suspected the scale of what was at stake and had chosen silence, and 1 who had wandered past a rope to look at a star map. I picked up my notebook again. I am going to need all of it, I said. Everything the Dran archives contain. Every record your lineage has suppressed. I looked at Wrath 7. I am not angry. But I am going to need to know everything before I make any decisions. And so is Earth. Earth, Dreth repeated, as if the word had just become much larger than it used to be. Earth, I confirmed. This affects my species. They have a right to know, and they have a right to be part of whatever conversation happens next. And if Earth decides to use the network as a weapon? Orin asked. His filaments were fully contracted now. If they use this power to dominate, then you will have been right to be afraid, I said. But I do not think that is what will happen. And I think, if you are honest with yourselves, you already know that the throne did not choose me by accident. The Ethoni ran a very long experiment. They were very careful about who they built the empathy strand into. They had 80,000 years to think about what kind of species they wanted holding these keys. I stood up, rolled my shoulders, and picked up my coffee cup. It was empty and cold, but I needed something to do with my hands. I need 12 hours, I said. I need to sleep, I need to eat, and I need to finish my notes. Then we are going to have a very long, very honest conversation. All of us. Including the parts of this that no one has wanted to say out loud. No one argued. I took that as a reasonable sign. I walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. One more thing. Whatever security arrangement you have set up around this station, triple it. Not because I am afraid, but because the moment word of this spreads beyond this room, there will be people in every one of your civilizations who decide the simplest solution is to make sure the inheritor never gets a chance to sit in the throne. I would prefer not to be assassinated before breakfast. I went to bed. I slept for 5 hours, not 8, because my mind would not quiet down, but enough to function. When I came back to the table in the morning, I had a full plan written out in the last pages of my notebook, and the first item on the list was, talk to Earth before anyone else does. 3 weeks later, I was standing in front of the Conclave of Seven, which had relocated to a formal chamber aboard the VEF diplomatic vessel currently in orbit above Ethon Prime. The chamber was designed to hold 7 delegations in equal standing. There were exactly 7 seats arranged in a circle. There was no head of the table. The VEF had built this ship specifically to ensure that no species stood visually above another during formal proceedings. I was standing in the center of the circle, which was the position reserved for someone presenting evidence rather than representing a faction. There had been an argument about whether I should be given a seat of my own. The argument had lasted 4 days. I had spent those 4 days reading through the drawn archives that Wrath 7 had finally handed over, communicating with Earth, and ignoring 3 separate attempts by different factions to privately offer me things in exchange for assurances about what I intended to do with the network. The offers had ranged from reasonable to absurd. The Suri had offered to fast-track Earth's application for full Conclave membership, which was genuinely valuable and which I had declined because accepting it would make every subsequent decision look like it had been bought. The Kalari through Kalis had offered access to their medical database, which was extraordinary and which I had also declined for the same reason. And one faction within the Omu Compact, not officially endorsed by Pello or Sevas, had left a data chip in my station that, when I eventually looked at it, turned out to contain coordinates for an Ethoni installation that the Conclave did not know about. I had reported that last one immediately and handed the chip to the Joint Security Committee. The look on Pello's face when I did so told me everything I needed to know about which faction within the compact was actually interested in cooperation and which one was testing me. Standing in the center of the chamber, I could feel the weight of all of it, the politics, the centuries of suppression, the genuine fear beneath the formal diplomatic posturing, and underneath all of that, the thing none of them wanted to say directly, they were afraid of us. Not of me personally. Of humanity. Of what we would become with access to the Ethoni network. They had seen empires rise in their own histories. They did not want to watch another one climb to power and decide that its vision of the galaxy was the only correct one. I understood that fear. I had read enough human history to understand it very well. I am not going to argue that humanity is virtuous, I said, and the chamber went quiet. You have read our history. You know what we have done to each other. You know the scale of conflicts we have survived, and some we did not survive well. Anyone who tells you that humans are inherently peaceful or naturally wise is either lying or has not paid attention. Some of them had expected a speech about human greatness. I could see the recalibration happening in real time. What I am going to argue, I said, is that the Ethoni were not looking for a perfect species. They were looking for a specific one. And I think, after reading their records, I understand why they chose the traits they chose. I walked slowly as I spoke, making eye contact with each delegation in turn. The Ethoni were brilliant. They were old and vast and extraordinary. And they built an empire so perfect, so optimized, so certain of its own correctness, that it could not adapt when it needed to. They froze. And when they finally understood what had happened, it was too late to change from within. So they chose to leave. And they chose to leave their legacy to a species that had not yet learned to be certain. A species that still argued with itself constantly, that changed its mind, that made mistakes and tried again, that had not yet decided it had all the answers. I stopped walking. They chose us because we are unfinished, I said. And being unfinished, we are still capable of becoming something. Something better than what we are right now. The empathy strand they gave us, it is not about feeling more than you feel. It is about being unable to fully dehumanize, to fully dismiss, another living being's experience. We are not immune to cruelty. Our history proves that. But we have never been able to convince ourselves completely that someone else's suffering does not matter. We always come back. We always argue about it. We always change. Silence in the chamber. I am not asking for your trust, I said. Trust is earned over time, and we have not had time to earn it with most of you. What I am asking for is the same thing the Ethoni were asking for when they built the throne: patience. Observe us. Watch what we do with what we are given. And in the meantime, let me show you what I intend to do first. I pulled out the document that Earth had authorized 3 days ago, after a conversation with the Secretary General that had lasted 6 hours and involved 4 emergency sessions of the Security Council. The Ethoni Star Gates, I said. There are 37 of them, in various states of readiness, distributed across the galaxy. When activated, they will reduce travel time between any 2 points in the gate network from years to days. I am proposing that the first act of the Inheritor be the activation of the gate network, and that access to every gate be equal across all species in the conclave, including humanity. No one gets priority access. No one pays a toll. The gates belong to the galaxy. The silence changed texture. It became something more complicated. The Ethoni archives, I continued. Medical, scientific, historical, the sum total of the oldest civilization in known space. I am proposing joint stewardship of the archive network, with scholars from every conclave species given equal access. Not filtered through humanity. Equal access. I set the document on the floor in the center of the circle, because there was no table. In exchange, I said, I need 3 things. Full disclosure from every delegation of every record, secret, or archived material relating to the Ethoni that has been held back. A formal truth process, not a punishment, a process, to address the suppression of information that has shaped galactic politics for centuries. And a seat for Earth at the conclave as a full member, not because of what the network gives us but because we are part of this conversation and have been from the moment I crossed that rope. I looked at Wrath 7. He looked at the document on the floor. Then he looked at me. Then, very slowly, he rose from his seat, walked to the center of the circle, and picked it up. The Dron will review this formally, he said. But I can tell you now that my vote will be in favor. I was expecting more argument. I was prepared for it. I had notes. But Iria of the Redis stood up next, and then Pello, and then, one by one, they all moved toward the center, and what had been a hearing became something else. It was not an agreement yet. It was a conversation. But it was the right kind. I thought about something my father used to say, back in Lagos, when I was young and impatient and wanted problems to resolve faster than they were willing to. The hardest doors are not locked, Marcus. They are simply heavy. You do not break them. You lean on them long enough that they move. I had not expected to be leaning on galactic history at 34 years old. But here I was. I kept my face calm and my notes ready. There was a great deal more to do. The night before I went back to the throne chamber, I could not sleep at all. This was different from the sleeplessness I had experienced over the past weeks, which had been the functional kind, the mind working through problems, running over details, checking and rechecking decisions. That kind of sleeplessness is almost productive. You lie there and your brain does useful work, even if your body would prefer it stopped. This was not that. This was the kind of sleeplessness that comes from standing at the edge of something so large that your mind simply refuses to stop looking at it. I sat on the floor of my quarters aboard the research station. 3 in the morning by ship time, which meant nothing on a planet with no day cycle, but meant something to my body. I had my notebook open on my knee. I had read through it twice already. Every note from the moment I first touched the throne. Every fragment of Ethoni memory I had been able to reconstruct. The star maps. The gate coordinates. The long, careful history of a civilization that had decided, in its final age, to do something remarkable. Instead of fighting to survive, it had chosen to make space for what would come next. I thought about Earth. I thought about it the way you think about home when you are very far away and something enormous has just happened and you want, more than anything, to talk to someone who knew you before any of this. I thought about the street where I grew up, and the school where I first read about xenoarchaeology and decided, at age 11, that it was the only career that made sense. I thought about my mother, who had asked on our last call if I was eating enough, and my father, who had asked if I was being careful, and my sister Adiz, who had asked if it was true that I had touched an alien throne and potentially changed the course of galactic history, and when I said yes, she had said, typical, and hung up. I loved them enormously. I had not told them what I was about to do. The call I had made to Earth, the one that resulted in the document I had placed on the floor of the conclave chamber, had gone through official channels. Secretary General Amara Osei had been extraordinary, calm, sharp, asking exactly the right questions, authorizing exactly what was needed. But it was not the same as talking to family. I wanted to call them. I decided against it. Not because I was afraid, or not only because of that, but because if I called them right now, I would have to explain what tomorrow morning was going to be, and I did not yet have words for it that would not frighten them. Better to call after. Better to call from the other side of this door. At some point around 4 in the morning, I stopped reading and started writing something that was not notes. It was less organized than that. It was the kind of writing you do when you are trying to be honest with yourself about something that you have been approaching sideways for weeks because looking at it directly is difficult. I wrote, "I am afraid." Then, below that, not of the power. I think I am afraid of doing it wrong. Of taking something the Ethoni built with so much care and patience and using it in a way that disappoints the intention behind it. They waited 80,000 years for this. They designed an entire inheritance structure. They seeded genetics across dozens of worlds over millennia. That is an extraordinary amount of trust to place in a species that has only been looking at the stars for 200 years. I wrote, but they knew what they were doing. They read the same history I have read and they still chose us. That means something. I wrote, it has to mean something. I closed the notebook, put it in my jacket pocket, and went to get ready. If I was not going to sleep, I was going to go now, before the station woke up, before the delegation started their morning routines, before anyone had a chance to observe or comment or interfere. I had learned, over the past weeks, that the moments that mattered most in my life had all happened when I was simply paying attention to something that interested me and letting my hands do what seemed natural. This needed to be the same. The throne chamber was a 20-minute walk from the station through a pressurized tunnel that the Commission had constructed after the initial discovery. My footsteps echoed in the tunnel. The lights were set to night mode, low and amber. I walked steadily and did not let myself think about turning back. The chamber was exactly as I had left it during my last formal visit, 4 days ago. The throne stood in the center, still radiating that soft, persistent glow from the symbols I had activated. The light had not diminished at all over the past weeks. Whatever I had started by touching it, it was still running. I stood in the entrance for a moment, looking at it. Scholar Elder Ven's remains were still in the corner. I had made a formal request that they be returned to the Veth for proper interment once the current situation was resolved, and Dreth had agreed immediately, which I thought said something genuine about him. Ven had been brave, in their own way. They had walked closer than anyone before them had dared. They just had not been the right person for what the throne needed. That was not a failure of courage. It was simply the wrong key for this particular lock. I climbed the steps to the base of the throne. They were not obvious steps. The throne had no conventional platform, it rose from the floor in a series of graduated levels that I had initially taken for structural support. But when I stood at the base and looked up, it was clear that they were meant to be climbed. They were sized for a being approximately my height and build. Another detail that had not seemed significant until it did. I stood at the base for a while. I am not sure how long. I was not praying, I am not a religious person, though I respect that many people are. I was thinking. Working through, one more time, everything I had read, everything I had decided, everything I had proposed to the conclave and everything Earth had authorized me to do. The Ethoni had left a network and a steward system. The steward was not a ruler. The word the throne had used, the concept, the intent behind the word, was closer to a custodian or a keeper. Someone who holds something carefully on behalf of others. Someone who keeps the doors open and the lights on and makes sure that what was built is not wasted or misused. I could do that. I thought I could do that. I climbed. The throne was larger up close than it appeared from the floor. When I turned and sat down, my back against the ancient surface, the chamber looked different from this angle, smaller, somehow, more human in scale. The glow from the symbols was warm on my skin. And then the world changed. There is no good way to describe what it feels like when 80,000 years of infrastructure wakes up and recognizes you. I will try anyway, because I wrote about it in my notebook immediately after and I want to be precise. It felt like being in a very dark room, alone, for a long time, and then someone turns on every light simultaneously. Not blinding, warm. The darkness was not frightening before the lights came on. You were simply aware that things existed in it that you could not see. And then you could see them. I felt the gates first. 37 of them, scattered across distances so vast that the scale of it should have been incomprehensible, but the throne translated it the way a map translates geography. You see the whole thing at once, and it makes sense. The gates were old and cold and quiet, but not damaged. The Ethoni built things that lasted. They were already running their self-diagnostics, already warming their systems, already recognizing the new activation key in my biology and preparing to open. I felt the archives next. Thousands of them, on dozens of worlds. Sealed vaults full of knowledge that made every library in the current galaxy look like a handwritten page. Science, medicine, philosophy, history, art, engineering, the full record of the oldest mind in the galaxy, preserved and patient. And then I felt the other things. The tools the Ethoni had used to manage the physics of their civilization. The systems I had called defensive, in the conclave, because that was the nearest human word, but which were not built for war, they were built for stewardship. Gravity management. Atmospheric restoration. Energy distribution. The tools of a civilization that had decided its final act would be to make the galaxy healthier than it found it. All of it, awake. All of it, waiting. Somewhere above the planet, I was aware of a drawn fleet dropping out of faster-than-light travel and moving toward Ethon Prime. They had decided, apparently, that they could not allow the activation to proceed. It was not the Wrath 7 faction, it was a hardline group within the drawn military that had been watching the conclave sessions and decided, without authorization, that preemptive action was preferable to the alternative. I felt them enter the system the way you feel a draft when a door opens in a distant room. I turned on the gravity tethers. Not weapons. Not anything destructive. The tethers simply held the fleet in place, gently, at a safe distance, like a hand placed on someone's arm when they are about to walk into a situation they have not thought through. The fleet's engines fired. The ships went nowhere. They were not hurt. They were simply stopped. I sent a message through the Ethoni communication relay, a system so far beyond anything currently in use that the Dron received it on every frequency simultaneously, in perfect clarity, in their own language. I told them that no one was in danger. I told them what I had just done and had not done. I told them they were free to observe and they were welcome to the conclave session that would begin in 3 hours, and I told them, plainly, that the tethers would release them the moment they confirmed they were attending that session instead of whatever they had originally planned. They confirmed within 4 minutes. I released the tethers. I sat in the throne for a while longer, not doing anything else. Just sitting with the scale of it, making sure I understood clearly what I was holding. Because understanding the scale of what you hold is the first requirement of holding it carefully. Then I climbed down. My legs were shaking slightly when I reached the floor. Not from fear, from the effort of staying still and steady through something that large. I stood at the base for a moment, hands braced on my knees, and breathed. Then I straightened up, took out my notebook, and wrote down the exact time the activation had completed, the number of systems that had come online, the fleet incident and its resolution, and a note to follow up on the authorization chain for the unauthorized drawn military action, because someone had given that order and that person needed to be part of the truth process, not hiding behind the chaos of a moment that had already passed. I walked back through the tunnel, notebook under my arm, and when I reached the station, I went directly to the communication bay and placed a call to Earth. It connected in 17 seconds, which was remarkable, and I found myself looking at Secretary General Osei's face, which was wearing an expression I had not seen on it before, not quite surprise, not quite relief, something in between. "It's done," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "The gates. Warming up. They'll be ready in approximately 72 hours for initial test activation. I'd recommend starting with the gate nearest Earth system and the one nearest the Veth homeworld. Politically, it'll demonstrate the equal access commitment immediately." She nodded. The conclave. 3-hour session starting shortly. The drawn military situation has been resolved without damage to any party. Wrath 7 is cooperating fully. I paused. You should know there will be more incidents. People who decide they don't like this outcome. That's going to continue for a while. The conclave needs a formal security structure, not military dominance by any one species, a shared framework. I've drafted a proposal. I'll send it before the session. "Marcus," she said, and her tone shifted slightly. Are you all right? I thought about that honestly. My legs had stopped shaking. The notebook felt solid in my hand. The coffee in the station kitchen smelled very good from where I was standing. I think so, I said. I'll know better after I eat something. She almost smiled. We're proud of you. The council wants you to know that. This wasn't what anyone expected when we sent a research team. We never know what we'll find until we find it, I said. That's why we send researchers. I ended the call, went to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat down at the table with my notebook and the drawn archive files and the draft of the security framework proposal, and I started working. The galaxy outside was noisier than it had been in 80,000 years. 7 species and 1 newly inheriting human civilization were all trying to understand simultaneously what this morning meant for them, their futures, their place in a map that had just been redrawn. I had a session to prepare for and documents to finish and coffee to drink. I turned to a fresh page in the notebook and wrote at the top, Ethone succession mechanics and engineered empathy markers in pangalactic biological seeding. Preliminary field notes. Marcus Vell, Xenoarchaeology Commission. Ethon Prime. Then I settled in and got back to work. The universe was awake. Someone had to help it figure out what to do next. It turned out to be a human. We are like that. When the moment arrives, we show up, we look closer than anyone expected, and then we pull out a notebook and start writing. It is, I think, the best thing about us.